Imagine you work for the federal government and have millions of dollars to spend on life-saving medical supplies during a deadly pandemic. You would be very careful with that money, would you not? You'd want to make sure whoever you granted that money to would successfully get those supplies, right? Well, according to a new book by journalist David McSwain, the Trump administration played fast and loose with government money in the early days of COVID. Pandemic Inc., chasing the capitalists and thieves who got rich while we got sick, details some of the shady characters who were awarded millions in government COVID contracts. They include one man, Robert Stewart Jr., posing as a Marine veteran who somehow nabbed a $35 million contract to supply the federal government with N95 masks. McSwain writes, Stewart had been named a key arbiter of a simple device that was the best defense against a virus that killed with horrifying complexity. Yet he had zero experience sourcing medical supplies. None. He was not a mask distributor, nor an importer of record, nor a freight forwarder. He knew little about how to navigate the supply chain. And it gets worse. The company that Stewart supposedly represented was suspiciously named Federal Government Experts. According to McSwain, they claimed to be experts at, quote, everything, from temporary staffing to IT consulting to a blockchain AI solution to government procurement, whatever the hell that meant. Yet there was no evidence that anyone besides Stewart worked there, and there was no record of the federal government ever hiring the firm. That's the kind of stuff the Trump administration ridiculously fell for at the height of the pandemic. In the end, Robert Stewart Jr. and federal government experts did not come through with the 6 million N95 masks. In February of last year, he pleaded guilty to defrauding the federal government. Joining me now, David McSwain, reporter for ProPublica and the author of Pandemic Inc., Chasing the Capitalists and Thieves Who Got Rich While We Got Sick. Thanks so much for coming on the show. How is it that some of these people who had no background in medical supplies, no other obvious qualifications, were able to get these million-dollar contracts? How much of this was incompetence? How much of this was corruption?
It's a little bit of all of the above. I mean, we as a nation found ourselves flat-footed by the time COVID hit in early 2020. We had sort of slowly, due to politics in Congress, defunded the strategic national stockpile, had something like 1% of what we needed in terms of masks and gloves to address that first wave. And at the same time, you had the Trump administration downplaying the virus. So by the time we finally tried to catch up, the solution, the national strategy really became, we're just going to throw billions out there and see what comes back. And you have sort of a rush of people, government bureaucrats, who are used to buying things like chairs and paper clips, who are suddenly in charge of getting this life-saving equipment. So you have some incompetence, just awarding things to people who clearly shouldn't have been getting awards. And then you also had some patronage coming from the White House.
There was a group called the Kushner Kids, tech and finance bros wrangled by Jared Kushner to follow leads on medical supplies. You write in the book, the Kushner Kids placed high priority on dead-end leads, streaming in from Trump allies and prominent Republicans, going so far as to track those tips on a spreadsheet called VIP Update. What potential leads were missed by the Kushner Kids while they focused on daddy's friends?
Yeah, there was a lot around this. The moment it was first reported, in those first scary months that Kushner had inserted himself into the pandemic response, there was a lot of intrigue, a lot of innuendo, but really civilians were brought in and placed into the center of our pandemic response and just didn't know what to do. They didn't have access to government money. They don't know how to approve a contract. And at the same time, you have pros who are really trying to catch up. So it really just created this mess. And in a couple famous instances, they turned down masks that a doctor said he could have delivered pretty quickly, and also based on a tweet at the president at the time, referred a contractor who claimed he could deliver ventilators to the state of New York. And he was paid millions of dollars for those and never delivered. And they're currently trying to claw that money back for taxpayers.
It's funny, this all came from the party that talks about balanced budgets and cutting down the size of government and efficiency. How much money, taxpayers' money, did they blow on this stuff? Let me ask you this. We mentioned Robert Stewart Jr. in the introduction, who pleaded guilty last year to defrauding the government. But across the board, big picture, are these COVID grifters, if we can call them that, are they being held accountable? Can we hold them accountable going forward?
I wish I could give you a dollar figure and tell you exactly how many people did it and got away with it. I mean, the truth is this was so chaotic, so messy. We were so ill prepared that people just came out of the woodwork, hundreds, if not thousands, and they got big deals. They defrauded other federal programs. I mean, our sort of irresponsibility in those early months attracted people who took the federal government and states and hospitals for a ride, and taxpayers got screwed.
Quick last question, 30 seconds left. If another pandemic happens, I mean, this one's not over, how do we stop this from happening again? Can it be stopped?
Well, this was always going to be a mess, but there are a few things that are, one, we can beef up the strategic national stockpile, which President Biden has proposed in his budget, something to the tune of $80 billion into health and human services, among other programs. I think by virtue of having been through this, if we were hit by another one, in the near future, we'd all be a little bit more ready. But in terms of solving the nasty politics that really prolonged this thing and kept us from having an effective national response rather than 50 epidemics, I don't know how to fix that one. I hope someone does.
I hope someone does too. The book is available now. David McSwain, thank you so much. It's called Pandemic Inc. Chasing the Capitalists and the Thieves Who Got Rich While We Got Sick.